Welcome to the fourth instalment of the Modifying Our LCV Jimny series. First of all, apologies for how long it's taken to film and release this episode. We are absolutely flat out at the moment, so the videos have unfortunately taken a bit of a back seat. Over the previous 3 episodes, we focused on some of the most popular modifications for the Jimny. These included interior essentials, such as a phone holder and armrest, to basic exterior modifications, such as a retro grille and LED taillights. We also fitted a set of high-peak JO1 wheels, and once we were finished, our LCV Jimny was looking quite similar to our other SZ5 Jimny. When thinking of what to do for our 4th episode, we decided that it was time to do something distinctive with our LCV, something that will truly set it apart. Introducing APIO, a name that needs no introduction in their native Japan. APIO are the Japanese Jimny specialist, having been in business since 1969 and producing parts for Suzuki since the late 1980s. They even have their own Jimny museum, featuring countless Suzukis from the past few decades. They entered the treacherous Mongolian Rally 3 times in a JB23, winning their class back in 2014. Nowadays, APIO offer a whole host of Jimny products, including wheels, suspension, exterior parts, and a wide array of interior accessories. Not so long ago, we were appointed as APIO's official UK distributor, enabling us to stock more of their huge product range. When browsing our shop, you can use the filters to sort through the APIO catalogue, helping you to find the items you need. Amongst the most in-demand APIO products are their interior accessories, such as cup holders, storage solutions and shift knobs, exterior parts such as tow hooks, and their range of 15 and 16-inch alloy wheels. However, for our build, we're going to use one of the lesser-known APIO products, the Narrow-Body Conversion, which includes new front and rear bumpers, side sill guards, and of course, slimmer front and rear wheel arches. We'll explain the reasoning for this conversion later in the video, but in the meantime, it's time to get started on stripping down our LCV Jimny. This is how it looked at the time, sitting on standard suspension with a set of 16-inch Magpie MO1 wheels. Since releasing the MO1 a few months ago, they've quickly become one of our most popular wheels, offering a modern design and perfect wheel fitment at an affordable price point. We'd also fitted a set of the smoked version of our ever-popular LED taillights. The smoked finish offers a fantastic look, especially on darker coloured Jimnys. In these shots we can see the wide stance offered by the original Suzuki wheel arches. It's time to take one final look before we pull everything apart. On a very cold January morning we got started, knowing that this was the last time our little Jimny would look this way. With the wheels removed, we could set about unclipping the hard race wheel arch liners and unbolting the front bumper. Taking off the front grille meant that we could remove the radiator shroud and access the rest of the bumper clips, and removing the bumper meant that we could also remove this lower ducting too. We could then move on to removing the factory inner arch trim, which finally meant that we could remove the standard wheel arch. This was the first time that we've done this on any Jimny, so we were keen to see how easily it came off the car. The process was similar at the rear. Once the hard race arch liner was removed, we could remove the LED taillights. We could then unbolt the rear bumper using the various bolts inside the wheel arches, under the bumper and inside the tailgate. To remove the rear bumper, you also need to undo the large clip that connects the bumper wiring loom to the main wiring harness of the car. With this gone, we could then remove the rear wheel arches, which simply unclipped once the few bolts were undone. With so many bolts and clips removed, it was important to keep them organised. With the exhaust removed, we quickly popped a set of high-peak JO2 wheels onto the car so we could move it outside. With the LCV in the yard, we could compare it to our SZ5. That was, once we removed the plastic sill trim pieces. We couldn't remove these on the ramp due to the location of the clips, so we had to do it on the ground. With the cars side by side, you can really see how much added width the original wheel arches give to the Jimny. You might be wondering why we went to such extensive efforts to strip down the car. This wasn't just to fit the APIO parts. it was time for some preventative maintenance. Since 2019, our SZ5 has been exposed to a number of harsh winters without any additional underside protection having been applied since we bought it. It's starting to take its toll, with rust showing in a number of key areas, particularly where the underside is often peppered with stones and rocks when driving. Lanolin-based products are popular with our customers when it comes to rust prevention, as they dry on the car clear, allowing you to see if any corrosion is forming underneath. Products that dry opaquely mean that you can't see any corrosion forming behind, which often happens as moisture becomes trapped behind them over time. Lanolin-based products should be topped up on the car every 6 to 12 months, depending on the driving environment, meaning you deal with any corrosion forming if need be. Before applying any products, the underside of the LCV needed a thorough jet wash to ensure that we were applying the product to a clean area. Unfortunately, we didn't film the application of the product as it's quite a messy procedure. So, once it had been applied and had time to dry, it was time to get on with the other jobs. First up was the APIO 40mm lift kit. This is the most extensive lift kit we offer, as it also includes front and rear adjustable panhard rods, as well as the usual springs, shock absorbers and brake lines. Starting at the front, the first job is to disconnect the brake line from the caliper. We could then disconnect the shock absorber and the front anti-roll bar, which allows the suspension to extend fully. This means that we can simply slide the existing spring out of position. As the replacement spring is longer, spring compressors are required. We can then install the new shock absorber and reattach the anti-roll bar. The beauty of the APIO Roadwind shock absorbers is that they are adjustable, each with 12 settings that can easily be changed. For now, we set the shocks to their softest setting. With the top of the shock absorber tightened up, we can then attach the new, longer brake line, starting at the caliper end. Here you can see the length difference between the existing and new brake lines. The new brake line is also supplied with a fresh set of washers for the banjo bolt, and it's very important that you use these. It's possible to quickly swap the chassis end of the brake line from old to new without losing too much brake fluid. It's then really important to wipe up any spilt brake fluid to prevent it from corroding any components. The extended brake line means that it is still slack, even with the longer spring and shock absorber fitted, which is really important. As we mentioned before, the APIO kit also included adjustable panhard rods that run from left to right at each end of the Jimny. Panhard rods are designed to control the lateral position of the front and rear axles on ladder frame cars. When lifting a car such as the Jimny, you might notice that one wheel sticks out further from the wheel arch than the other. This means that the length of the panhard rod needs adjusting. For now though, we are going to set the new panhard rods to the same length as the existing fixed length panhard rods, and then we can adjust them at a later date. It's worth noting that this APIO front panhard rod is only compatible with right-hand drive cars. Left-hand drive Jimnys use a front panhard rod with a slightly different shape, which goes around the front differential. We can now move on to the rear of the car. We must point out how shiny everything looks after the rust prevention product has been applied, which is definitely one major benefit. After disconnecting the bottom of the rear shock absorber, we can then slide the existing spring out of position. It's worth noting that, on right-hand drive Jimnys, the rear left spring is slightly shorter than the rear right spring, so it's important to get them the right way round when installing them. This isn't a problem on left-hand drive Jimnys. We can now install the new shock absorbers and the APIO bump stop extenders, which make the existing bump stops sit lower down. With the rear right shock absorber disconnected, you can see the amount of strain that the original rear left brake line is under when the suspension is fully extended. Usually, we would disconnect the rear brake lines before removing the rear shock absorbers, but we wanted to show you why we replaced these brake lines with extended items. When installing the new rear springs, it's important to make sure that they are correctly seated on the rear axle. We can then tighten up the new shock absorbers and longer brake lines before moving on to the rear panhard rod. Much like the front panhard rod, we set this new adjustable item to the same length as standard, so we can adjust it at a later date. While it's not included in the APIO Lift Kit, we also elected to replace the original front steering damper with an APIO Roadwind item. Upgrading the steering damper can often greatly aid steering feel and performance, both on and off-road. Swapping out the steering damper is quite a straightforward job, although we did get caught by surprise when using our ball joint splitter. Fitting the new steering damper is simply a case of reversing the removal process. An interesting quirk of this lift kit is, due to the shock absorber adjustment knobs, the steering lock needs to be reduced ever so slightly to reduce the risk of the knobs fouling the steering components. This is taken care of by fitting a small single washer to both front suspension hubs. Next up, it was time to tackle the caster correction bushes. Technically, these should have been done while the front shock absorbers were disconnected, but our workshop hydraulic press wasn't ready in time. When lifting the Jimny, the caster angle of the front wheels is reduced. Reducing the caster angle means increased steering sensitivity and lack of feel at high speed, along with reduced steering self-centering. Think of a supermarket shopping trolley, for example. Neither of these attributes are particularly desirable, so the caster correction bushes help to push the caster angle back to the original factory setting. While some caster correction bush kits replace all 4 front bushes in the radius arms, the APIO kit only changes the frontmost bushes. Either way, this job requires the front radius arms to be removed. The APIO bushes include diagrams with measurements as to how to align the new bushes, which specifies a distance of 148mm between the bush holes to ensure that they fit the radius arms properly. Using a brightly coloured paint pen helps us to align the bushes properly, as it's very hard to measure them once they are on the hydraulic press. Once fitted, we could double check that the measurement was okay. We had a perfect 148mm, which was fantastic. This meant that we could refit the large radius arms and move on to the next stage, which is brake bleeding. As you can see, we had lost a little bit of brake fluid when swapping the brake lines over, so it's important to top this up before beginning the brake bleeding procedure. On the vast majority of cars, it's best to start with bleeding the brakes furthest away from the brake master cylinder, so on the Jimny we start with the rear left corner. While one of us loosens and tightens a brake bleed nipple, one of my colleagues is inside the car, pressing and releasing the brake pedal. You can see that the air bubbles in the hose gradually reduce to zero, meaning that the bleeding is now complete on this side of the car and we can move on to the other side. It's important to keep an eye on the brake fluid level. If it drops too low during bleeding, you risk drawing a huge amount of air into the system, meaning you'll need to start all over again. Once we've tackled the rear, we can then bleed the front left and then finally the front right. The end goal is a very firm brake pedal with no air in the system at all. Once all 4 corners have been bled, it's time to top up the brake fluid one last time. With the suspension and brakes ready to go, it was now time to move on to the exciting stuff. As we mentioned earlier, we will be installing the APIO Narrow-Body Conversion, and a key component of this conversion is the wheel arch set. Compared to the original Suzuki wheel arches, these are of course narrower, but also have a slightly different shape and profile to them, which subtly changes the look of the car. Upon first inspection of the APIO parts, it was clear that the quality was top-notch, with the textured plastic being extremely tough and visually appealing. But why are we fitting them? In Japan, Jimny owners have access to the JB64, a 660cc engine model that meets K-car regulations. However, if you want this look, but would prefer the additional power provided by the JB74's 1.5 litre engine, there aren't many options afforded to you. Rural Japanese roads and forest tracks are also notoriously narrow, having been built with K-cars in mind. Having a narrower Jimny will help you to explore these rural areas more easily, while also enjoying the increased power of the 1.5 litre engine compared to the JB64's paltry 660cc. APIO noticed a demand for this in Japan and so created the narrow body conversion. The conversion uses new narrow wheel arches and side sill guards, which then allow you to install APIO's tactical bumpers that are designed for the JB64 model. The new wheel arches are designed to clip in place, just like the OEM items, but they are also supplied with double-sided tape to help the affixed rubber seal meet the bodywork securely. After a quick test fit, we needed to trim the original inner wheel arch trim to ensure that it didn't protrude past the new arches. Once this was done, we could clip the arch into place using the factory mounting points and then make use of the double-sided tape. It's worth noting that, while you could simply run your JB74 Jimny without any wheel arches fitted, you would be left with a lot of exposed, ugly holes in the bodywork, hence the requirement for these narrow fenders. At the rear of the car, no trimming was required, but we did take time to clean off the worst of the sticky residue left from when we removed the original wheel arch. While the APIO wheel arches don't use exterior bolts, APIO do supply these stick-on novelty bolt heads so that you can obtain this effect. Some people might like it, others may not, but we decided to stick them on to see what we thought. After the wheel arches came the most daunting part of the conversion, the side sill guards. These are required because the original Suzuki sill trim pieces aren't compatible with the narrow wheel arches, plus they offer fantastic sill protection and look really cool. The guards themselves are each manufactured from two pieces of 3mm thick A5052 duralumin, while the various mounting brackets are manufactured from steel. The mounting brackets are designed to be riveted into place along the Jimny sills, and then the guards are mounted to the brackets. This means that if you do damage the sill guard when off-roading, you can easily replace it by mounting a new guard to the existing brackets. After mocking up the brackets and loosely fitting the guard, it was time to swallow some brave pills and crack out the drill and rivet gun. There was no turning back now. Thankfully, there were no mishaps and we got the guards fitted successfully. After a long Sunday afternoon in the workshop, it was great to take a step back and see how the Jimny transformation was starting to take shape. Next, it was time to move on to the front bumper. As mentioned earlier, this is APIO's tactical front bumper and is designed to suit the narrower JB64 Jimny. Compared to the standard front bumper, it sits a lot higher and allows for a lot more tyre clearance thanks to its narrow shape at each end. We were really impressed by the quality of the materials, and there were provisions for both the standard running lights and headlight washers, should your Jimny have them. APIO's tactical rear bumper is also much slimmer than the standard item, allowing for more ground clearance. It isn't compatible with standard shaped taillights, so replacement lights and reflectors are supplied, which reminded me of the rear lights you would see on a classic Land Rover Defender. Before sending both of these bumpers to the body shop to be painted, we first wanted to test fit them. We would always advise doing this, as it means you can manhandle the bumpers and make any necessary modifications without worrying about damaging fresh paintwork. Installation of the rear bumper was very straightforward, as it utilised all of the factory mounting points. The only area that needed particular care was situating the bumper behind the rear section of the rear wheel arches. Personally, I would prefer it if this section was integral to the bumper rather than the wheel arch, as it would allow for the bumper to be removed far more easily. It's certainly something we'll mention to APIO in the future. At the front, we needed to do some more trimming, as the inner liners needed to be cut down to ensure that they could tuck behind the slimmer front bumper. Otherwise, they would be hanging down beneath the bumper, which would look a bit strange. We could then test fit the bumper, which, again, was straightforward as it uses the original mounting points. However, we did notice that something wasn't quite right and the bumper wasn't sitting correctly. When looking from underneath, we could see that the bumper was fouling the front chassis legs. After consulting the instructions that we definitely should have paid closer attention to earlier, it showed that we needed to cut out a small section of each side of the bumper when installing the bumper onto a JB74 model. Perhaps the JB74 has a different chassis leg configuration to the JB64. We're not sure, but either way, it was time to get the Dremel out once again. Another test fit showed that we successfully cut out the correct areas, so we could then install these supplied covers to hide the exposed chassis legs. The front bumper was now ready to go to paint. While we were at it, we also took the time to test fit the APIO tactical front grille. Again, the quality of the finished part was absolutely fantastic, and we were more than happy to install this grille without it needing any further painting or modifications. This meant that we could set about transferring the front indicators and assorted mounting hardware from the existing front grille to the APIO item. As with most Jimny front grilles, installation is very straightforward and mainly involves a large number of clips. After all of this test fitting, it was finally time to get the Jimny outside so that we could take a look at it in daylight. It was so far so good. What this did show us though is that how much a typical set of JB74 specification wheels protrude from the narrower wheel arches. These high-peak JO2s are a direct fit for a regular JB74, but here they were protruding quite a bit. We'll tackle that later. The bumpers soon arrived back from the body shop, and we were really impressed with the results. We'd asked them to use a textured plastic finish for the upper section of the front bumper, while using a metallic gunmetal finish for the lower section. We could then set about installing the standard daytime running light and fog light units, along with the number plate brackets. It was then time for the final installation, and we wrapped the corners of the bumper in masking tape to try and avoid any mishaps with the fresh paint. The front grille could then be installed afterwards, as many of the front bumper clips along the upper edge can only be installed with the front grille removed. To finish off the front end, we then installed these APIO Front Tow Hooks on both the left and right side. These are both manufactured from 9mm steel and are powder coated in a distinctive yellow colour, although they are also available in red. These are the tactical version of the APIO Front Tow Hooks, which means that they mount higher up to suit the shape of the tactical front bumper. APIO also offers front tow hooks that sit lower down to suit the shape of the standard front bumper. It's worth noting that the front right tow hook is only compatible with right-hand drive cars. On left-hand drive Jimnys, the steering rod and panhard rod are orientated differently. We do stock other front right tow hooks from other brands that are suitable for left-hand drive Jimnys. With the front end taken care of, it was time to move to the rear, and one part in particular that we were really excited about. For motorbike enthusiasts, the YOSHIMURA name needs no introduction, as the go-to manufacturer of incredible aftermarket exhaust systems. APIO have teamed up with them to create their Cyclone exhaust for the Jimny, available in both stainless steel and beautiful titanium. We opted to go with a stainless steel option for our build, although the titanium version is 2.5 kilograms lighter. APIO offer versions of the Cyclone exhaust to suit both the regular rear bumper and the tactical rear bumper that we are fitting to this Jimny. The tactical version sits slightly higher to suit the raised design of the bumper. The exhaust is a complete work of art, and we must admit that we spent a great deal of time admiring it before carefully beginning the installation. Compared to regular aftermarket exhausts, we were quite surprised by how many components were included in the kit, with quite a bit of assembly required. However, the build quality is absolutely exquisite, and it was a pleasure to work on the exhaust before fitting it to the car. The exhaust hangers are bolted into place and utilise clamps that secure the back box, while the back box is connected to the centre pipe using a slip joint and these beautiful YOSHIMURA branded spring clips rather than a traditional flange with nuts, bolts and a gasket. As this is a catback system, it mounts to the OEM downpipe using the original Suzuki spring bolts, and with everything tightly secured, we couldn't wait to listen to the first fire up. We couldn't get excited for too long though, it was time to move on to the wheels. As we mentioned earlier, JB74 specification wheels were protruding too far from the wheel arches, so the narrow body conversion utilises JB64 specification wheels which have a higher offset. If we were fitting these 16x5.5J APIO Ventura wheels to a JB74, we'd use a -5 offset, but for this build we needed the +20 option, which means that they sit 25mm further into the wheel arch by comparison. After installing the required tyre pressure monitoring system sensors, we fitted our favourite BF Goodrich KO2 tyres in our most popular 215/70R16 size. While the lifted suspension and slim front bumper would allow us to easily fit a bigger size, such as 235/70, we didn't really feel the need for this build, and the weight penalty only slows down the Jimny further. After inflating and balancing, we quickly chucked a front and rear APIO wheel onto the car to see how they looked. As you can see, they were now sitting flush with the narrow wheel arches, while the high peak JO2s on the other side, which were also fitted with 215 tyres, were protruding quite a bit, which would be an MOT failure here in the UK. This is due to them having a much lower offset. With the wheels sorted, we then moved on to the rear bumper, which took a little longer for the body shop to complete, which is why we tackled the exhaust and the wheels in the meantime. The first job was to install the various lights and transfer the light wiring harness from the existing Suzuki bumper to the new APIO one. Due to the new reversed and fog lights being quite a distance away from the brake and indicator lights, the harness needs extending slightly using the wiring that APIO supply with the kit. We could then install the rest of the wiring harness, which connects the left and right tail lights together. You might notice that there are no provisions for the number plate lights, but we'll get to that later. With the bumper bolted up, we could then affix the reflectors and test all of the lights out. As Japanese Jimnys don't have a rear fog light, the APIO bumper is supplied with two clear lights to act as reverse lights. Therefore, we need to either fit a red bulb or a red lens to this light on the right hand side, as this is a rear fog light on UK Jimnys. With the bumper in place, we could then install the rear tow hooks. Like the items at the front, these are also 9mm thick and are designed specifically for the slimmer APIO rear bumper. APIO do offer rear tow hooks though to suit the standard rear bumper, but they sit lower and mount in a different fashion. With all of that done, it was time to get the car outside and take it for a quick test drive up and down the estate. It's worth noting that we still have the shock absorbers set to their softest setting, which allows for a bit more body roll and is more suited to off-road conditions, so the car did feel very soft at this stage. After a quick drive, we couldn't help but take a minute to step back and admire our work. We really weren't sure what to expect with this kit, and while the average onlooker might not spot any differences between this and a standard Jimny, a Jimny enthusiast would immediately notice that there's something is quite different about this build. You might notice the silver wheel nuts and lack of rear centre caps. To remedy this, we installed a set of special APIO rear centre caps and a set of their black 31mm locking wheel nuts, which include some fantastic details such as the APIO logo on the end of each one. The APIO centre caps are manufactured from super tough plastic, and while we were at it, we also installed one on the spare wheel to complete the look. Now back to the car. The rear end also looked brilliantly distinctive, with the raised rear bumper, exposed exhaust, yellow tow hooks and small taillights transforming the look of the Jimny. There was one piece missing though. As there are no number plate lights on the tactical rear bumper, we used APIO's Relocation kit to enable us to mount a number plate on the tailgate instead. This also meant that we could use a JDM size plate, and the lighting for this was fed from the original number plate wiring behind the rear bumper. Over at the front, and the tactical front bumper really allows us to see and appreciate all of the beautiful front suspension components as well as the distinctive tow hooks. Thank you very much for watching, and once again we really apologise for the long gap between this and our previous episode. In the next episode we'll finally get to spend some time on the road in this LCV Jimny, starting with a quick camping trip and followed by some off-roading with other Jimny owners. We'll also be fitting more APIO parts, including underbody protection and interior accessories. Stay tuned!